So, story of you. What's the story?
What's the story? So Story of You, difficult title to arrive at, I think. Wasn't one of those title before the music moments, but the song arrived quite easily, I think. In the sense of, I love pop craft. I love, quite often listen to top pop artists, global top 50s and on DSPs. And and just really enjoy immersing myself in just really solid pop writing, and I find that really invigorating and illuminating as well. And sometimes often my work is informed by it. The immediacy of it I find really really interesting, and I think that's certainly a lot of classical musicians can learn from that in many ways. It's just how to communicate the emotion of a piece of music in a way that's succinct and immediate and direct. I can't remember who I was listening to specifically at that time. Might have been Justin Bieber or somebody like that. And just coming up with a hook, a sort of undeniable hook that was melodic and tuneful, and particularly with Story of You, that I suppose there's an element of that kind of Billy Joel-esque swagger of left-hand accompaniment and just this kind of arcing right-hand melody. And then occasionally moments of syncopation, just to throw the listener just off kilter a little bit, just to bring in those contemporary references. But certainly it's a pop song. It's a pop song played by a solo piano. And it has an intimacy to it as well, in the sense of it feels, or it felt to me and still does, that it's a song for a significant other. And I'm sure my wife wouldn't wish to be brought into this scenario, but it's the sort of thing I can imagine gifting to your Valentine or something like that. A really romantic, beautiful song. I hope that's what people take away from it anyway.
That's so nice. And there's quite a lot of like grace notes. It almost sounds like an improvisation, and it just gets bigger and bigger as well.
Yeah. So I suppose a simply stated melody. I hope. Well, I love jazz. I absolutely adore jazz. There's a often when people think of jazz, maybe if they're not jazz aficionados, they often think of it, the kind of really complex Coltrane kind of fiery cascade of notes. But there are so many different shades of jazz, so many different nuances, just as there are with classical music and indeed pop music. And what I was trying to take from that was just that sense of lilt, that kind of dancey, jazzy-esque quality, but packaged in a classical way, so that there's a kind of elegance to it as well. I hope there is anyway. And with those, it's got some grace notes, or whatever you want to call them, essicaturas, just at certain moments that I think just lend itself to that sort of contemporary quality as well, just bringing out some of that almost Kenny G-esque. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Kenny G-esque moments, and just making the piano really sing in the fullness of the melody.
Amazing. And the other thing I noticed was that it starts off quite simply with the theme, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and creates like this whole world. Was that something you did on purpose when you were writing it?
I think that there is a kind of theatrical quality to it, and in the sense that I almost imagined a dancer on stage, lights down low, and then the lights coming on and suddenly revealing the audience in the auditorium, but the sense of intimacy is still retained, and there's a kind of love letter between the listener, the audience, and the performer. And so it's that sense of coming into full bloom, but still retaining the elegance and the intimacy and the moment as well.
That's nice. Does your wife like the song?
I hope so. I hope so. She'll certainly let me know if she doesn't like the song. She'll tell me to, yeah. She has this phrase. Whenever I play something that she doesn't like, I mean, my wife, we've been together since we were 18 years old. She's lived every single note with me. She's practicing when I was a student, practicing 10, 12 hours a day. She lived every single note, been to every single concert. She's my biggest supporter. And we have this little phrase, when it's not quite on point, she says, you can pack your bags in the nicest possible way. And then I know immediately, move on. So again, it's just like this sort of recurring joke we have. But honestly, it's just a joy to have people close to me who I really trust. And she loves that album. Every time I go in the car, I switch on the radio. And before I can get to the radio, my album plays because she's had the CD on in the car. And it's such a beautiful thing. I'm so grateful for her support.
That's so nice. Again, you decided not to orchestrate this one. Was that maybe to create a sense of intimacy?
Yeah. Whenever I feel that it's too much, I mean, you can over-egg a moment. It's sometimes, I guess it's a little bit like, I remember as a young pianist playing Chopin and other romantic composers, always wanting to eke out every single phrase, romantically, too much, too indulgent. But it's sometimes less is more in a moment, and having those moments where a piano can just live on its own, and people can immerse themselves in the intimacy of that moment, sometimes can be much more powerful. I guess as a performer, a composer, you have to know when those moments arrive, and as a listener, you can discern. Sometimes people might call it overproduced. Sometimes you listen to an album and think, yeah, that's great, but I would have preferred stripped back version or whatever. You've got to know when it needs to stay stripped back and when it's worthy of embellishment. And I think that's one of the key things about making music that you hope people will enjoy and listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, millions of people do.
Well, I'm very grateful they do.
Yeah, and any other thoughts and reflections on recording or writing the track?
No, I do. Well, actually, there is one reflection. I remember being in the studio recording this track, and actually, going between one other consideration that we do in the studio, particularly if it's solo piano, is to play with click or without click in headphones. And sometimes one can play with click and then be out of time and then come back in, as I quite often do when I'm playing with an orchestra, because you never want it to be metronomic. You want it to sound as if it has a certain freedom of movement, but also you want the orchestra, who may play after you at a certain point, to be able to conform to the click. So there is a trick to doing that. Or you can play totally free, devoid of click. And so that's one thing I experimented with this track in particular. I can't remember which we arrived at in the end, but it's really just listening to those tracks to see where it felt most natural, where it felt that it just sat in the pocket, and again, that it couldn't have been played any other way. It had that freedom of movement, yet it had a certain discipline, inherent discipline and elegance to it as well, and so that's always a sort of fine balance.